So this session is Yoga's paradigm of the mind. How does it help us? So let me first answer a philosophical question, because it has pertinence here, and that is why, if through the perfection of the mind, great sages like Patanjali had realized the Purusha, what they call the self or the Atman, it doesn't matter the name, that's just what they tend to call it, is Purusha. Why was it that they didn't come to the understanding of non-dualism? If non-dualism is the truth, and they had perfected the mind as an instrument of experience, why was it that they didn't come to the experience of non-dual reality? That I am one with I am reality itself, rather than the experience they had that I am the self, but you are another self, and you are another self, and you are another self. That all of the selves are different, and each one is infinite, but there's not a connection between them. Each is separate. And so you find in yoga that the name for the state of liberation is Kaivalya. Kaivalya means the state of being Kevala, being alone. So the realization, the highest liberation in yoga is aloneness, which means I'm separate from nature, separate from the universe, which, as Swami Atmarupananda said in answer to my question, is real according to yoga, and I'm separate from all of you. And so I attain to a state of aloneness. It's the only answer I can come up with is one that that Swami Ashokananda, a great man of great enlightenment and knowledge, said. He said that Sankhya and Yoga both are psychological systems, and they saw the problem of humanity being perfecting the mind, because it's through the mind that I know everything. I know myself through mentation, through mental activity. I'm aware of myself through mental activity. I'm aware of this body because of the mind. I'm aware of the outer world because of the mind. I know knowledge with the mind, and I experience ignorance and delusion and confusion with the mind. I know happiness through the mind. I know sadness through the mind. I know God through the mind. Everything is known through the mind. It's the instrument of experience. So the yogins saw that the problem was to perfect the instrument of experience. Once that's perfected, one sees the light of infinite consciousness and realizes that I am that. But Vedanta says that something else is necessary. And that is, Vedanta has always claimed that the knowledge Tattvamasi, thou art that, with the resulting experience, aham brahmasmi, I am that reality, the whole of reality itself. That is needed. And so the yoga system and classical Sankhya, there's a doubt about what ancient Sankhya really was, whether it was much closer to Vedanta or not. But classical Sankhya and the yoga system, they were interested in perfecting the mind as the instrument of all experience. And once that's done, their work was done. They didn't go the next step to realize that that which is true of me is the fundamental truth of everything. I've understood that by knowing which everything here is known, because everything here has come out of that. So that is the only explanation I can find for why the great sages attained to liberation. Yes, they were liberated. They attained to liberation. They attained to enlightenment, but not the final enlightenment of knowing non-duality. So in Raja Yoga, it deals, as I've said, with the mind. It's the path of psychology. And its interest is in perfecting the mind as an instrument, because, as I said a moment ago, it's through the mind that I know everything. I experience everything through the mind. In Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, it's even said that for the highest enlightenment, first there has to be a brahmakara vritti, a fluctuation in the mind which takes on the nature of Brahman, and because of the infinity of Brahman, that dissolves the mind itself. It dissolves the wave itself into Brahman. So even for the knowledge of Brahman, initially, it has to flash in the mind before you rise above the mind. And so The yogic position is still extremely important, that it's through the basic yogic insight. It's through the mind that we know everything. So if my mind is not in a good condition, how can I know the truth about anything? Everything that I perceive will be confused because of my mind's state of confusion. So now the connection between the path of yoga and the path of knowledge, the path of jnana. One can abstract out the four yogas into four separate yogas which are integral to themselves, self-contained, more or less units of understanding. And that's the way we need to do to get a clear understanding of each one. But as Swami Atmarupananda said, each of the yogas contains something of all of the other yogas because we are composite. In our phenomenal state, we're composite beings. In our absolute state, that's not a problem. But our problem is that in our present state, we find ourselves to have different aspects to our psychological being. And so the great help of yoga is that it strengthens the mind, gives power to the mind. Each yoga has its virtue, each yoga has its weakness and its problem. The problem in the practice of, one of the problems in the practice of jnana yoga is that, yes, okay, now I've got an initial understanding of the nature of Brahman and how I am one with Brahman, and I've got an initial understanding, conceptual understanding of consciousness and the separation between the seer and the seen and all of that, and the conceptual understanding of oneness, but my mind isn't strong enough to hold on to it. So for many of us, most people perhaps, if you want to follow the path of jnana, you need to do something to strengthen the mind and the resolve so that you can hold on to that truth to the point where this universe dissolves into Brahman and you know yourself to be the infinite, not by conviction, not by faith, but in direct perception. I know myself to be the infinite. So that's why Swami Vivekananda often taught non-dualism and Raja Yoga in a somewhat blended form. You find places where he's clear that this is the path of knowledge, where he says that for the jnani, the follower of the path of knowledge, it doesn't matter, let the mind run on. I'm not the mind. I stand apart from the mind. Who cares about control of the mind? I am the self. But how many can do that effectively? And so if we find we can't do it effectively, then we turn to something that will strengthen and clarify the mind so that I can, once I grab onto something, I've got it like a bulldog and I won't let go. Yoga gives the mind that kind of power. So you find that Swami Vivekananda gave innumerable, not literally innumerable, but many, many lectures on yoga in this country, in England. Swami Atmarupananda also gave great prominence to yoga, to Raja Yoga. And that is why. They gave it in the context of Vedanta, not as an opposing system, which is contrary to Vedanta, but as something which strengthens Vedanta itself. Because the great genius of Vedanta was its ability to absorb, assimilate, and synthesize all of the insights of all different, any tradition. And so Swami Vivekananda continued that work, started by Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya himself mentions yogic practices. Madhusudana Saraswati, another great follower of Advaita Vedanta, several centuries later than Shankara, he was actually a great scholar in yoga as well. And you find in his commentary on the Gita that he oftentimes gives very deep analysis from a yogic standpoint of the Gita verses. So that process of integrating yogic knowledge into the ultimate knowledge of oneness of Vedanta, that has been carried on for more than a millennium now. And Swami Vivekananda was the latest in that process of absorbing into Vedanta the positive contributions of all of the different schools. So, the mind. It's important to know what the mind is, how it functions in order to control it. So again, as I said in the first session, Patanjali is not concerned with dividing the mind into different functions of the buddhi and the manas and the chitta and the ahamkara. He calls the whole mind by the name of chitta, what in Vedanta we call the antakarana. Antakarana in Vedanta means the inner, literally the inner instrument, and it refers to the mind as a whole. But then in Vedanta we say, as they do in Sankhya also, that, well, part of this antakarana is the buddhi, part is the manas, part is the chitta, part is the ahamkara. Patanjali doesn't do that. He deals with the mind as a whole. And there's a good reason for that. The reason for that is that what we seek is the complete unification of the mind. The yoga philosophy says that the mind is really only one thing. These different functions of buddhi and manas, I won't explain these because it would take too much time, but many of you have read them. If you are not familiar with them, that's okay. It won't matter for this discussion. But the function of buddhi, manas, ahamkara, chitta, those four different functions traditionally attributed to the mind, those are different ways that the one chitta reacts. The one whole mind, it has these four different ways of functioning. We don't need to be concerned with these different functions. What we want is to learn how to control the functioning of the mind itself so that the mind becomes quiescent. So all knowledge comes by a fluctuation in the mind. I perceive the outer world. How? Through my senses, I'm aware of the outer world, and the mind takes on the form of that which is being perceived. So what I see, in my experience, what I'm seeing right now in my experience as I look around, is the mind which is taken on the form of the building in which I'm seated. And so there's the conscious self, without which there's no experience, and then the mind, and the mind takes on this form, and I perceive that form. My experience is because of consciousness illuminating the form that my mind has taken. And so I want to get control over the mind itself so that it doesn't take on all of these forms in order to get perfect clarity. So there's several paradigms of meditation which are given, or several metaphors for the nature of meditation. One is that Prajika Brahma Prana led us in a guided meditation at the beginning of the day with the lake of the mind. So the mind is compared to a lake where a wave arises on the lake, and that wave is a vritti, a mental modification. When the mind is still, and when the lake is still, think of a mountain lake. When this lake is still, you get a perfect reflection of the sun, the sky, and the trees on the other shore. It reflects it perfectly. When the lake is roughed into waves by the wind, then you don't get a clear reflection. And so with us, when the mind is perfectly still, it gets a clear reflection of reality. And then we realize that reality is separate from the mind, and we go to the reality itself. That's the goal of yoga. So we have to still the mind in order to get a clear reflection of reality. Another analogy, which is an analogy of power. You take a magnifying glass and you collect the rays of the sun by holding the glass in the sun, and you focus the rays of the sun onto a point. And thereby you can set on fire a piece of paper, dried leaves, etc. All of us as kids used to delight in doing that. What are you doing? The rays of the sun are already there. They're already falling on the leaves, but nothing is happening. That's because the rays are falling randomly and not in a single point. You take the magnifying glass, you're not adding anything by putting the magnifying glass there. You're not adding more power. You're just putting something in which takes the existing rays and brings them to a point. So all of these different rays going out like this, they come to a point, and thereby you have tremendous power. So through concentration of the mind gains great power, and that helps us to break through the veil of ignorance. It helps us to realize the truth. So one is, calmness allows for a clear vision of truth, because the mind is not ruffled into waves by different thoughts and so forth. Another is the image of power, that a magnifying glass concentrates the rays of the sun. So meditation, concentration, brings the existing rays of your mind. You don't have to add anything. The existing rays of your mind into a point where it has great focus and the ability to reveal anything. It's a strange thing in life that we experience all of the time, but we rarely step back and see what's actually happening. And that is, if you put your mind on anything, you find that with time, you begin to study it, think about it. At first, it seems like a confusing subject. Nothing makes any sense. But you begin to look at it, examine it, then more and more it begins to reveal knowledge. That's because you've focused on it. Anything in the world, literally anything, reveals tremendous knowledge if we can focus our minds on it. There's a whole chapter in the Yoga Sutras, the third chapter out of 4 chapters. The third chapter deals with that, where the secrets of the universe being revealed to the concentrated mind. So any new subject we come to, at first it looks very confusing. So we first come into Vedanta, and we don't know the terminology, we don't know the basic ideas, we don't know what it's about. Everything looks confusing. We hear about the self. Well, what do you mean the self? Do I have a self? And so forth. You begin to study, and gradually things begin to open up. It begins to make sense because of the power of the mind to reveal the truth when it's focused on a topic. So another illustration of meditation is the pouring oil from one vessel to another. If you pour water from one vessel to another, or fruit juice or something, it forms a stream, but it breaks into droplets and it splashes. But if you pour oil, the stream is continuous. It doesn't break into droplets and it doesn't splash. There's just a continuous thread. So that also is meditation. Meditation is when the mind is able to focus on something and go continuously towards it in a continuous stream, without any noise, without any reaction, without anything, just that continuous silent stream of concentration. So the mind has that power. So the mind, again, is taken in yoga as one whole, which can take different forms and act in different ways according to what we are experiencing. But basically, we want to take that mind, purify it, clarify it, and bring it to eventually to a standstill. But we can't bring it to a standstill directly from our present state. So what does yoga ask us to do? It asks us to learn how to concentrate the mind, to concentrate on one topic. So if you try to say, okay, now I'm not going to think about anything, I'm just going to keep my mind a blank, one of two things happen, and sometimes both of them happen by turn. One thing is, you try to do that, you try to make the mind completely quiet, not think about anything, and you fall fast asleep. And so many people get up from meditation and said, oh, I had a wonderful meditation. I didn't think about anything. And if you were watching, you would see that their head was in their lap the whole time and they were breathing very heavily. They were snoring. So they weren't meditating. They just, by trying to make the mind a blank, they fell asleep. The other thing that happens is when you try to make the mind a blank, if you're not really sleepy, is that the unconscious mind takes over and throws up all kinds of garbage from the unconscious mind, or garbage or nonsense or whatever it is. And so neither is wanted. So yoga teaches us to use the mind, to focus the powers of the mind, and for that we have to have some object to focus on. We learn to concentrate by focusing the rays of the mind on an object. That object can be outside, the object can be internal, it can be something physical, it can be something mental, it can be something religious, it can be something which is not at all religious. Like Swami Vivekananda said, that you can attain to samadhi by focusing just on a black dot. Just by focusing on the black dot and not thinking of anything else except for that. Heightening your awareness of that black dot, not thinking about it, just being aware of it. You can attain to samadhi just through that. Or you can repeat a mantra, you can meditate on a deity, whatever. But the purpose is to focus the rays of the mind. Once that is done, then you realize after some time, after that, the mind has become much more subtle through the process of focusing, that every state of mind is momentary. It comes and it goes. Another state comes and it goes. It comes, it goes, it comes and it goes. The Buddhists say the same thing. Their analysis ends somewhat differently, but they say the same thing about the moments of consciousness, that there's a thought and it goes down, another thought comes, it goes, another thought comes. So between every two thoughts, there's a moment of silence in the mind. But normally our mind is thinking so fast that we don't see the moments between two thoughts, the moment between two thoughts. Like in a film, if you're watching a film, there are all of these still photographs that are taken in a series. And there's a space between each of the two photographs on the film strip. But because the film strip is moving quickly, you get the feeling of motion, of activity. But actually each frame is still. And so in the same way in the mind, our thoughts are so fast that we don't see that there's a moment of stillness between each two thoughts. And as the mind becomes more subtle, that space between two thoughts becomes larger. And then one can come to the point where it's possible to still the mind altogether. And again, at that time, it's said that the self reveals itself, that I am pure consciousness. And with the help of Vedanta, I know that I am not just pure consciousness. I am the reality of the universe. I am Brahman itself, the reality itself. So, other things about the mind we need to know. This is basically the short description of why meditation is practiced in Raja Yoga and how one eventually comes to the stillness of mind, not directly by practicing stillness now. Or let me modify that. There are very wonderful meditations where you meditate on stillness, but you're actually, stillness itself is the object of your meditation. You actually do have the awareness of stillness. But the stillness that I spoke about a moment ago, between every two thoughts, that's not stillness based on a thought of stillness or a perception of stillness. That is just stillness in itself. So, having spoken about the mind and how to bring it into a focus, into clarity, and then into stillness, let me come back and say something about the effects of our thoughts. We have what are called the kleshas in yoga. Buddhists have kleshas also, but they describe them somewhat differently. The kleshas are five-fold in yoga. In Buddhism, there are three, but in yoga, there are five kleshas. A klesha means a pain-bearing affliction or a pain-bearing impulse of the mind. So these are fivefold. The basic three are raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. Those of you who don't know Sanskrit, you don't need to know the Sanskrit words, but I say them for some people who do know Sanskritic language or Sanskrit itself. Raga means attraction. Dvesha means hatred. And abhinivesha refers to the fear of losing life. But it actually means fear itself, because the fear of loss of life is the root of all fear. When I'm afraid of standing in front of a crowd and speaking in front of a crowd, then that fear of public speaking comes because I feel somehow my existence itself is threatened. A fear of a bully comes because I'm afraid of somehow being threatened. And so the basic fear is the fear of loss of life, but that extends into all of our minor fears as well. So the three ways that we emotionally react to the world are through attraction, excuse me, through dislike or hatred, or through fear. So the easy way to think of them is, one is moving towards. I'm attracted to something, so I move towards it. I want it, I want to have it, I want to experience it. Then hatred is moving away from. I don't like it, I want to get away from it. And then fear is moving away from. So Let me start over and say that raga, attraction, is moving towards because I want it. Dvesha, hatred, is pushing against. And abhinivesha, or fear, is running away from. So towards, against, and running away from. They're the three basic emotional reactions. You may say love, compassion, what about those? Those are not really in any way connected with these primal instinctual movements. Love comes from our higher nature. Compassion comes from our higher nature. At least an unconscious recognition of an underlying oneness, which causes the experience of love. So raga is just ordinary impulsive attraction towards something because I like it. Dvesha, against it, I don't like it, push against it, get it out of here. And abhinivesha, oh my God, this is threatening my existence, I'm going to run away. So when I react to any experience, or when I do something based on these kleshas, then it forms what's called a mental impression, a samskara, or a mental impression. That is a memory within the mind. And these memories are what cause me to repeat actions, or to repeat my running away from an action or pushing against an action. If I remember a bad experience with, say, eating a hot chili pepper, and I'm not used to hot chili peppers, and it burns my mouth, and it causes sweating and so much, and I'm terribly, my nose is running, and here I am at a dinner with other people, and I'm having this terrible reaction to a chili pepper, which I'd never had before. Next time I see a chili pepper, I say, no, 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 get that away from me. I can't eat that, can't do it. Why? Because that memory is there. And so it's these memories which inspire us to further action. So in the process of yoga, we have to be very careful of the memories that we are forming, because those go into the mind, and they are what cause us to act again in different ways. And so my time for this session is up. Just the meditation and question and answer session is left, but let me just sort of bring this to some sort of conclusion so it all makes sense. So in the perception of something, I have the mind taking the form of what I'm perceiving, and the consciousness, which I am, the consciousness of the self, illuminating it, making it known. And so that is my conscious experience. There's the consciousness, the light of experience, and then that which I'm experiencing, which is the fluctuation of mind. So knowing that, I want to control the mind so that I get the full power of the mind, and also the clarity of mind, so that I can perceive the ultimate truth. But I also have to know that in experience, everything that I experience, everything that I do, it's causing a memory within me. And that memory is what causes me to act again. I taste something that's really good, and then after some time, when I'm hungry again, I remember, oh, I had that. That was really good. I want to have it again. And so, not that there's anything wrong with that. That's a natural impulse. But that's the way the memory directs us to act. We act on the basis of that. And so, when we have a memory of something, there's just the visual and auditory memory. I saw this and I heard that. That is never a problem. We don't have to worry about that. Even in our meditation, if terrible thoughts come up, just look on them as thoughts, nothing more. The problem is that our memories are tied to the experience of pleasure and pain, good and bad, pleasure and pain. And so when I'm trying to meditate and some horrible image comes to my mind, and I feel either shame, or I feel afraid, or I feel, oh my God, what is happening to me? That's because the emotional content of that memory, if in my meditation I can cut the connection between the emotional content, which comes from the kleshas, attraction, repulsion, and fear, then my memories are no trouble to me. The worst memory in the world can come to me, and it doesn't move me, because I've cut the connection between the emotional content and the memory itself. The memory is just an image. The sensory memory is just an image. It can't do anything to you. It's like a picture on the wall. You can have a picture on the wall of a murderer being hung or something, but it's not, nobody is actually being hung. It's just a picture. It's nothing but a picture, paint on canvas. And so our memories are nothing to be afraid of. It's the emotional connections which we try to sever. And so I'll talk more about that because this is a deep subject. But without understanding this, much of yoga cannot be understood. So the, again, takeaways from this session are the nature of the mind being taken as a unity, the fluctuations of the mind are what we perceive, but along with our mental experience and our actions, memories are created, and memories are part of the problem that yoga attempts to take care of also. How, I'll deal with later. So now let me take a couple of questions if there are any, and then we'll have another very brief guided meditation.
Okay, I think we'll start with Swami Atmarupananda. Swami, do you have a question?
Yes, this is about what I was noticing about the kleshas, the activities of the mind, the model of the mind proposed by yoga, is the importance of repetition. So the conditioning happens through, is the volume low? Is the volume low?
There we go. Okay.
Okay. I was noticing the importance of what might be called the power of repetition. Our conditioning has happened through multiple repetitions of certain experiences. And I think the deconditioning also of the mind, purification of the mind, if you will, also requires repetition. So what would you say is the role of repetition in yoga and the role of insight in yoga? I mean, the question is that through repetition of what we want the mind to be, we purify and prepare the mind. But ultimately what we're looking for is not just a purified mind, but an insight which becomes possible in a purified mind. So would, for example, the insight at the very beginning, would it be impossible right away without purifying the mind? Or would the insight come and be ineffective in an impure mind? So this question is about repetition and insight.
Yes, a very good question. So that brings up the topic of abhyasa, practice. Patanjali says that the general method forward, this is the most general analysis of practice in yoga, is abhyasa vairagyabhyam tan nirodha. Those waves of the mind, the vrittis of the mind, the fluctuations of the mind, the mutations of the mind are controlled by practice and dispassion. Dispassion means I don't care about these things. I'm not interested. I'm interested in something else. That is, I want to find something deeper. So dispassion means not dispassion towards everything, dispassion towards ordinary things, so because I'm passionate about finding the deeper truth. And then abhyasa means, it doesn't literally mean repetition, it means practice. But what is practice? Practice is repetition. Practice is repeating the same thing over and over again until I get it. When I was a kid, and all kids do this, many of the games that kids play, the real deeper intention, so you could say the evolutionary intention of game playing of children, is to develop skills that they will need in later life. For a child, because the child doesn't really have adult responsibilities, it's just play. But they do many of the things that adults do, but from a sense of play. But actually they're developing the skills needed as an adult. I spent, not that this helps me now, but it did help with eye-hand coordination. I spent countless hours and days as a kid trying to throw a knife, spinning the knife so that it would stick into a tree. Now, as a Swami, I've never needed that particular skill, but there was a purpose to it. That is, it was learning hand-eye coordination. And so I do that over and over again until I got it. I used to love to play football and baseball and things. And so playing any sport, what do? You practice over and over again until you get muscle memory. And then you get accuracy. You do that only by repetition. And the feedback that comes from watching what happened when I do something. And so that's all about repetition. So in spiritual life also, what I'm trying to do, most spiritual practice is actually, if you look at it, it's imitating what is spontaneous in a state of enlightenment, or the state of an enlightened soul who's aware and moving within this world of ours. So if I take up bhakti, I pray. What I'm trying to do is to call up the devotion which is spontaneous in a saint. I'm trying to direct my mind towards God through my prayer. But that is spontaneous in the mind of a saint. Sri Ramakrishna didn't have to direct his mind towards God. He couldn't take his mind away from God because God was the reality. God was all that there was to him. But for us, we practice trying that. And so with concentrate, we say, I'm going to meditate. No, 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 we're not going to meditate. We don't know how to meditate. We're going to practice at meditation. Or if we're kids, we're going to play at meditation. That is, I'm going to repeat my mantra. I'm going to do a visualization, practice mindfulness, whatever it is. But I'm trying to do that, which is the spontaneous state for a saint. That is, I'm trying to repeat it over and over again until it goes deeper. So so all of spiritual practice is repetition. And insight, that can come at any time along the way. We shouldn't think that insight will only come at the end of all of my evolution. It may, but it's also true that it's possible, because what insight is insight into the truth which is the truth now. And so while I'm practicing, sometimes even in a rudimentary stage of practice, suddenly because of past karma or because of God's grace or however you explain it, suddenly I have a flash of insight. So until I have a flash of insight, let me go on repeating what I know to be true based on the experience of the saints. This will lead me to a state of enlightenment, this practice. I go on repeating it, perfecting it, refining it, until a flash of insight comes. But again, I shouldn't think that the insight and realization are so distant that I'll never get there, that I'll be practicing for lifetimes, and who wants to do that? No, I'm practicing now, but I should also always have the sense that there's just a thin veil between me and the reality. And one of these days that's going to split. And when, I don't know. That's dependent on karma and grace and other factors that I'm not in complete control of. So let me repeat what I have to repeat, and then insight will come when the factors are conducive for the veil to open and to reveal the truth to us. So another question.
Lakshmi.
Lalit Raj, I'll unmute.
Hey, hi. I have a quick question on the difference between Atmabodh and Atmagyan. What is the real difference between that? And is it the same thing? And is it self-realization is Atmabodh? And what is the connection with the Anantnath with the Atmabodh?
No, because of trouble I'm having with this sound, and could somebody repeat the question? I understood Atma Bodh, but I didn't hear the question. Lakshmi, did you catch the question? Just a minute. I'm going to have to put on the headphones so I can hear it without back coming from. And please.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
So just wanted to understand the difference between Atmabodh and Atmagyan. Is it the same thing? And what it has to do with Anantnath.
What does it have to do with what?
Anantnath,
The Anahata, or the Shabda Brahma.
Yes.
Okay. So yes, Atmagyan basically are the same thing, and you can always make subtle distinctions between things, but there's not really need to make a subtle distinction. between Atma Bodha, the knowledge of the self, and Atma Jnana, the knowledge of the self. And so that's basically the same thing. And then with Anantanad or Shabda Brahma or the Nada Brahma, etc., that is Brahman from the standpoint of sound. Let me explain. Usually we trace the creation of the universe from the standpoint of form. We say that God created the heavens and earth, God created human beings, God created the plants and trees. So what we're doing is thinking from the standpoint of form and matter, which is the stuff that makes up form. But we can also trace creation back from the standpoint of sound. And that is the whole basis of the mantra shastra, and also the basis of the spiritual standpoint of the Vyakarana school of Sanskrit grammar in India. The classical grammarians made grammar into a spiritual science. And so those who follow sound, whether it's through mantra or through the study of language, they're trying to trace back creation from the standpoint of language. And the idea is that it's out of language that creation has come. You see that in all traditions in an unclear form. In the Jewish and Christian Bible, the Torah and the Old Testament, same thing. They say, it says in Genesis that God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God didn't make something. He didn't go to a laboratory and take stuff and mix it up and pour it out and there was light. He said, "Let there be light," and there was light. He spoke, and out of the word came light. So the word of God is creative. And so Nada Brahma, the Shabda Brahma, Anantanada, all of that is going towards Brahman from the standpoint of sound until one gets to Para Vak, the supreme speech, which is beyond all words, beyond all movement, which is Brahman, but approached from the standpoint of sound. And so, yes, there's not a difference between Brahman and Shabda Brahman. There's a difference in how you approach it, whether you're approaching it through sound or through form or through consciousness or how.
Okay, Maharaj, would you like to have your guided meditation now, or would you like to take another question? We have about 5 minutes.
Only 5 minutes? Okay, that won't really be time for a meditation, so let's take another question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll unmute Mega.
Pranam Maharaj.
I'm sorry, hold on just a second, Megha. Let me put this back in because otherwise I can't hear you. If I keep it in, then it causes other problems. But at least for the question, let me put it in. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. Virtual Pranam Maharaj. I have a question regarding memory. This is recently I've been also thinking about this because of this terrible time that we're going through and losing so many people. And, the memories you have with them, and someday, we may lose our parents if they, if we still have them. So how do we deal with that? We have so many memories from childhood and not just parents, but with other people, and we have emotions attached to them. So, I know we talked about 3 kleshas, and then the fear of losing someone. I don't know if that's a klesha, but at least that's the fear I have. So fear of losing someone and the memories attached with them are just something that I've been struggling with. So how do we deal with that?
Yes, that's a very good question. Because you see in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, Holy Mother, all 3 of them, that they were not like traditional yogis of any of the 4 yogas, not traditional yogis in that when they lost someone that was dear to them, all 3 of them had the power to weep over they could weep over the loss of someone that they loved. Now, a traditional yogi would remain unmoved no matter what happens. And so somebody dies so that I'm unmoved. That's okay. But Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji, they saw things somewhat differently. That is, they saw that there are those things which hold us back from God. And that we be uncompromising about in order to come to God, as uncompromising as we have the strength to be. That differs from person to person, but as uncompromising as I can reasonably be in my situation in life. I'm going to take advantage of those things that help me towards God and avoid those things that don't. But for a person of the stature of Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji, they were free from the ordinary attachment of human beings, but they had love for other people. And so when someone that they loved passed away, they wept for the loss of the person. Yes, they knew that the soul is immortal. They knew that there ultimately is no loss. They knew that the person who died, that they're not weeping for them. They're weeping for the fact that, oh, the person that I loved, I won't be able to see, I won't be able to talk to. And so we in our tradition, we don't emphasize the traditional yogic standpoint of I'm untouched by anything, let everybody around me die, I don't care, it doesn't matter to me. No, Swami Vivekananda especially, and Holy Mother, emphasize the need for compassion, to go out. If you see someone hungry, then you should feel they're hungry as your own and go out and feed them. If you see someone weeping, then feel they're weeping to be your own and go out and help them. And so there's nothing wrong in feeling that I love my parents, I love my children. That's good. We would be lesser people if we didn't love our parents, if we didn't love our children, etc. But we have to understand that whatever happens in life, I have to be able to accept it and deal with it. So someday my parents will die. If I don't die first, someday my parents will die. And so that I have to know, I have to understand that that's part of life. And when it happens, I can deal with it because I know it's part of life. It doesn't mean that I won't feel sad because I lost them, but it means that the deeper part of myself knows that there is no loss, that there is no death. But the surface of the mind is going to feel that loss of people. So that I don't need to be afraid of. I don't need to feel guilty because I'm weeping because somebody just died that I loved. Or my dog died and I loved my dog and now I'm weeping, and so what kind of yogi am I? No, that's okay. So know these two things. Know that at the surface of the mind we feel loss, and that's okay. But also we must know at the deeper level that there is really no loss, that everything is happening as a play within consciousness. Swami Vivekananda said, this will be the last thing I say in answer. Swami Vivekananda said that the wall never weeps, but the wall is just a wall. The wall never tells a lie, but the wall is just a wall. The wall doesn't care whether you live or die, but the wall is just a wall. Our ideal is not to become a wall. Our ideal is to become identified with the infinite spirit, and then to see that spirit manifested in all. And that leads to tremendous love. And that love leads to the feeling of loss when I lose somebody that's dear to me, even though the deeper part of me knows that there is no loss, that it's all just the play of consciousness. So you see Sri Ramakrishna at one moment laughing and dancing when his nephew dies, and the next moment weeping because he says, well, who will I talk to tomorrow?